G'day mates, it's Busta here. And before the video begins, I would just like to give HelloFresh a huge shout out for sponsoring this video. HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans and delivers step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so you can just cook, eat and enjoy. HelloFresh does all the meal planning, shopping and prepping so you can focus on a healthier you and a happier family. Spend less time meal planning and grocery shopping so you can get that time back to do more of what you love. All meals come together in 30 minutes max, call for less than 2 pots and pans, and require minimal cleanup. The 3 plans to choose from are Classic, Veggie and Family, with the option to switch between for when your tastes change. What I personally found out that I liked about HelloFresh was the huge amount of variety that you have in their menu. I honestly don't know anyone who enjoys burgers more than I do, and I tell you what, their cheesy stuffed barbecue pork burger looks amazing. So for $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, all you have to do is go to hellofresh.com/BeScared80 and enter the promo code BeScared80. That's $80 off your first month of HelloFresh. Go to hellofresh.com/BeScared80 and enter the promo code BeScared80. I hope you guys take HelloFresh up on their offer, and without further ado, let's begin. So, before I begin, please note that this was really hard to write, and at many times sharing this, I just had overwhelming flashbacks. So, please forgive me if it sounds a little bit jumbled, and I tried my best to do it all right and edit it correctly. So for context, my dad grew up with this man named Bruce and considered him one of his best friends. Bruce was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in his late teens, and my dad, being the kind and caring soul that he is, stepped in to be his guardian. I say that lightly though. I mean, he's always helped out when Bruce was going through an episode, as M's parents were MIA. Growing up, Bruce was always around, and I saw him as another father figure in my life. He lived in a small town 2 hours from my city, where we also had a holiday home, so he was constantly coming up to stay at ours, and he was kind and calm and patient, and also an amazing artist. Almost yearly, though, Bruce went through phases of refusing to take his medication. This then triggered an intense manic episode, some of which I've witnessed, and they're frightening to see for a young child who only knew this person as quiet and calm. He would do things and say things far beyond his control and couldn't quite grasp reality. And that's unfortunately where it begins. I was 12 when this happened, so it was around 10 years ago, but it still feels so fresh in my mind. So every summer, my family and I would take a trip down to our beach house, Bruce's town. Our little house was a one-room unit, where us kids would usually sleep in the lounge, but for Christmas, our parents bought a massive 3-person tent for us to sleep in the front lawn. So, while my parents slept in the house, we got the tent. A week before my dad had to drive back up for work, he got a strange call from Bruce. Although at the time I didn't know what it was about, I could see the concerned look on my dad's face as he told Bruce, "No, I won't do that." After further arguing, my dad hung up and murmured to my mum about something. "I'll sort something out," my dad said, and then he left. I asked what was wrong because my mum's expression turned into worry. She shrugged it off though and told me not to worry, and that was that. Later that night, I heard from my mum talking to my auntie that Bruce is refusing to take his medication unless my dad withdraws money. From what I know, my dad is in charge of Bruce's finances and his bank account because Bruce has a meth problem or something. Bruce has a son who's trying to stay clean from it, and after Bruce tried and failed to get his son to buy him some meth, he turned to my dad, who also refused. I totally get it. He's an adult and can make his own choices, but my dad didn't want to enable his drug problem, right? My dad stepped in to be a guardian of Bruce, so that was his job. And this is where everything goes sour. Bruce started threatening to stop taking his medication ever again, and that he hadn't been for weeks. He then started threatening to harm my brothers and me. He said to my parents, "They trust me, it would be easy." My mum freaks out and tells him that she's calling the police on him. The police arrived at his house to see that the whole property was empty. He had fled and was hiding somewhere, which made everyone really uneasy. Nothing really happened in the next coming weeks, and it was time for my dad to drive back up to the city for work. Mum felt okay staying down with us, and of course, the three kids were just oblivious to all the commotion that was going on, and so we were too. Everything is good for the first few nights with Dad gone, and then it starts going downhill pretty quickly. So it's around 3:30 a.m. My brothers and I are sound asleep in the tent. My mum is in the house. She too is fast asleep when she wakes up to a bombing of texts from Bruce. They're all blank, but since this is the first time hearing from Bruce since he threatened her kids, my mum is wide awake in full-blown panic mode. Bruce then rings her, and as she answers, he doesn't reply, and instead he just breathes heavily on the phone for 10 seconds before hanging up. The second time is the same. Mum asks where he is, but is hung up on. He rings the third time saying, "back deck," before just hanging up. My mum hears a loud bang from the back of the house and quickly calls the police. The only way to the back is going through the front lawn where my brothers and I were sleeping, and I don't remember much except being shaken awake by my dad's best friend, who my mum called in tears, and coming into the house to see 3 police officers standing around. My brothers and I were wide awake now because we were curious as everything was going on in the house. And then this happened. My dad came back down for us with the news that Bruce's son had come up to him in the city to apologize and confess that he was told to come to murder our whole family in exchange for a large sum of money. My dad was in shock and rushed back down, and Bruce was back in hiding again. My mum let everyone who knew him and was close to him know what happened, and if he did come to them, that they were to let the police know, who will immediately detain him as he was considered dangerous and mentally unstable. The most terrible thing about this whole situation, though, was that one of her supposed best friends who knew him let him stay at hers instead of calling authorities. On a side note, too, they have only started talking again recently after Mum forgave her. But as the summer starts to wind down, we return to the city to find a few terrifying things. My mum and dad come home to one of their bathroom windows smashed and dirty footprints just everywhere. But for some reason, nothing out of the ordinary had happened until my older brother, an avid cockatiel lover, went out to check out our aviary birds and find that they were all missing. Not one of them was in there, and we assumed that they must have escaped and flown away, until Dad got a nasty surprise opening our barbecue to see all 10 of them had been cooked alive. My parents can't prove it was him, but after all that had happened in regard to Bruce, it probably was, especially after finding out what Mum's friend did. To make matters worse, though, our neighbour heard and saw what was going on when we were broken into, but didn't bother to ring the police or even let us know, and my parents were pissed. She made some sort of awful excuse about being home alone and never having witnessed something like this, but it was pretty petty. Anyway, the whole situation was just terribly frightening, and I've spent my whole life just trying to move on from it. So I met Herb Baumeister, who killed 12 to 20 men. I met him at a straight friendly gay bar near my house in 1995, the now defunct Varsity Lounge. The Varsity is one of the bars where he almost certainly met his victims. I was a regular there as it was a very nice dive bar just half a block from my apartment, my last years in college. The Varsity is an older man's gay bar mostly that was also popular amongst both gay and straight students at Heron's School of Art. Definitely not a typical pickup place, and I showed up about 15 minutes before my girlfriend had reserved a booth for us. Now, I remember that he was far more aggressive than the average Varsity patron. When I walked in, he immediately made sure to catch my eye and smiled and waved. When I sat down in our booth, he joined me uninvited and introduced himself as Herb. I let him know that I was straight and my girlfriend was on the way, and I'm pretty sure that he didn't believe me, but he didn't stick around after I refused his invite to go to his house party. His face got angry for a second, like a flash of fury, and then he went back to acting and playing his role and just went away. A year later, his wife turned him in basically, and they started finding skeletons in his backyard. And while I was never in danger, it was still creepy as hell to find this out. I wish I had more salacious details to add, but I just don't. I had no trouble recognizing him when it hit the news, though, as the encounter was just so unusual, and I don't know anyone else with the name Herb. This is my experience from a long time ago, back when I was in high school, about 19 years ago. English is my third language too, so I'm sorry if I mess up anywhere. So, we just moved into a new home. Lots of stuff and a buttload of furniture was just scattered around the house everywhere. But we managed to arrange my parents' room, the kitchen area, and most of the guest hall, and the dining room too by midnight. My parents were exhausted, so they immediately just went to sleep. And I went to my room and found out that it was in no shape whatsoever to even sit comfortably anywhere, let alone sleep. But I managed to organize a few boxes by closing the door and put a mattress on them. Before I could go to sleep, though, I heard a cat meowing from behind me. I turned and I saw a black cat just gently sitting in the middle of the room, under the moonlight, and constantly meowing. I went towards the cat, and it sat there for a few more seconds before just walking into the shadows. I turned on the light, and it just wasn't there anymore. I searched, and there was just no sign of it. The windows were closed and locked, and in search of that cat, I made a mess of my stuff, and I was in no shape to rearrange them, so I took the mattress and went outside into the hallway. I turned off the lights and laid on the mattress, getting ready for some much-needed sleep, when suddenly I heard footsteps coming from behind me. I thought that my father or my mother probably woke up because of the commotion that I made earlier. The lights were out, and they had no idea that I was sleeping in the middle of the corridor, so I instantly sat up to warn them of my position. And as soon as I turned towards the sound, someone jumped on me. The thing felt like a small girl, or kind of like a midget female with long hair, but with really leathery and hard skin. She was pushing with all she had to get onto my torso using her knees, and I strangled her hardened neck in return. And I know that this is going to sound strange, but it felt like I was choking a polished or varnished small stone column, rather than a neck. Another problem too was her weight. She felt like she was just made out of stone or something. I could barely move, and the worst thing though was her limbs seemed like they didn't have any kind of fingers on them. Like, the hands were all amputated from the wrist, and she was trying to push my arms away from her neck. At that point, though, I just didn't care. I was really angry, and I thought it was an intruder, and as I struggled to push that thing away, I stared into its face and couldn't make out any features. The thing was just totally black. I wrestled with it for around 20 seconds before I managed to toss it into a small table below me. I went for the light and turned it on, and it was gone. But the table had been turned over from the impact, and my parents rushed to see what had happened. We even called our neighbours and searched in and around the house for half an hour, and, well, you probably guessed it by now, but we couldn't find anything. We called the cops and filed a report, but that was about it. Nothing ever happened. That is, until several years later when I went abroad for my graduate studies. So, I was living with an undergraduate roommate at the time. A funny guy, kind, and he had a good spirit. However, one night, his scream just woke me up out of nowhere. He was in the process of running into the kitchen, and I instinctively jumped up and ran after him. His face was priceless, and I wish that I had filmed it, but when I asked him what the hell was wrong, he told me that as soon as he laid down on his bed, he saw a little girl sitting on my back while I was sleeping, and as soon as she glanced at him, she made a long jump towards his bed like a frog, and then he screamed and just ran away. Another year had passed, and I just moved into my new girlfriend's house, and on the second night, she screamed, and I instantly jumped out of bed and went for the tennis racket that was beside our bed. I turned on the lights and checked the room and asked her what happened, and she said that there was someone near the doorframe. I ran and checked every nook and cranny around her house, but I couldn't find anything. No entry, no traces of anything unusual, and when I questioned her about what she saw, she answered there was a little girl staring at her. Now, I've got to ask if any of this is even related, or if it's all just a complete coincidence. All I know, though, is that whatever I encountered all those years ago, it was real. A few years ago, when I was 11, a girl, and my brother was 6, a new person started being seen in the neighborhood. I know in most places that's not really a big deal, but we live in a really small town. Everyone knows everyone else, and all the kids just kind of play together, even though we're all different age groups. No one had ever seen this guy before, and he was probably around 40, I'd say, had long ratty hair and a scruffy face and an old dirty jacket. Nothing weird happened, but it was just strange that no one had seen him before. A few weeks went by, and at least once every other day, me and my friends would see him somewhere just walking around the neighborhood while we rode our bikes or played tag up and down the streets. But still, nothing strange really happened. But then, one day, me and my brother and 2 of the older boys in the neighborhood, 3 and 14, were walking down the train tracks in the woods that stretch behind all of our houses. And we thought that we could hear walking behind us, but everyone goes there to walk their dogs, so we didn't really care too much or think anything of it. The footsteps kept getting louder and faster, though, until finally the oldest boy turned around and saw the guy jogging in our direction. He told us to run down the path and towards his backyard and tried to talk to the guy. The guy just kept jogging and didn't say anything. We all ran to the boy's house and told his parents, and they called the cops, and shortly after, 2 police came and talked to us and searched around the tracks. They said that they couldn't find anyone, but could see some footprints that looked like an adult's that had been running in the other direction, away from the houses. They said that we did the right thing, and if anything weird happens, to tell the adults and call again. A week or so went by, and we didn't see him again. Until one day, me and my brother were playing in the backyard, and I heard something in the woods. I looked over, and I could see the guy in the bushes just watching us. I screamed, and my stepdad came outside, and the guy was gone. My stepdad called the police, and they came and pretty much said the same thing as before. A few more days go by, and no one sees him. One afternoon, though, my stepdad took me and my brother into the woods to go play on a big rope swing that's been there just forever. The rope swing is in the woods, and it's on the opposite side of the tracks from where our house is, and we were playing there for a while, and we heard footsteps walking down the tracks. They stopped close to the path to the rope swing, and then we heard rustling in the bushes. At this point, my stepdad grabbed me, told me very calmly and quietly to take my brother and go down a different path that led to the next street, run to the store that was close by, and wait there for him. I took my brother and made him walk in front of me, and just before we turned around a bend, I looked back just in time to see my stepdad walking towards the noise. He pulled something out of his jacket and gave it a flick. It was a big collapsible metal billy club sort of thing, and he kept walking, and we just ran to the store at this point. We went inside, and I got some ice cream for my brother and told Linda, the lady who worked there, what happened. She told us to go and sit down and made a phone call, and I thought that she called the police, but now I'm not so sure, thinking back on it. I think she called my stepdad, to be honest, and she talked for a few seconds, and then she just hung up. She looked worried but relieved at the same time, and she told us to just stay there and that everything was going to be okay. About an hour later, my stepdad came into the store. He hugged us, talked to Linda quietly, and then he just took us home. Obviously, I asked him what happened, but all he said was that it's all good. Everything's fine now. And no one ever saw that guy again. So just a heads up, these aren't my experiences, they're actually my brother's. So, when my brother was in high school, he's 25 now, and I don't know exactly when these things happen, so we'll just go with high school. He was really good friends with a guy that we'll call Eric. His house used to be a doctor's office in the 1800s, so we're already off to a good start, right? And a lot of really spooky stuff just went down in that house, and I'm pretty sure it still does to this day, but Eric and my brother haven't talked for like a year and a half, so I can't say for sure. But every time my brother went over there, something spooky always went down. And when I say spooky, I would probably crap myself and throw up simultaneously. So my brother had seen what they all dubbed the Watcher at Eric's house on multiple occasions, and a ton of other people have seen too, so he's not just crazy. So when you go into the basement at Eric's house, right when you get down the stairs, there's a laundry room. To the left is the living room, and there's one more room to the right. I forgot what he told me they used it for though. But they were in the living room just playing video games, and from the third room they just heard a bunch of noise, and when they turned around, all this stuff was just falling off of shelves and plants were knocked over, and Eric called out for his mum and dad, but nobody answered. Creepy, right? Well, in my opinion, that's nothing compared to what they all dubbed the Watcher. I call it the Watcher too because it just doesn't interact with people. It doesn't do anything. It just kind of makes really weird and terrifying movements, and it just kind of watches you and observes. It doesn't walk to my knowledge, and it just kind of stands there and looks at you. The basement is the most active area of the house, and probably because it was a doctor's office in the 1800s, so that's where the Watcher was mainly seen. But it was honestly just everywhere in that house, and on one occasion that I'm aware of, Eric and my brother were playing video games and they got up to go and get snacks or something, but when they got up and went to go upstairs, the Watcher was just standing in the corner of the room, staring at them, making absolutely horrifying movements, kind of juttering around. Unfortunately, I don't have any experiences of my own there to share because, well, I've never been to the house, and my brother isn't going to be just like, hey, so we haven't talked in a year and a half, can my brother come over and see if there's ghosts there? And yes, these stories are real, allegedly. My brother doesn't really get scared of stuff, but I could hear the fear in his voice when he told me the encounters that he had there. One summer night, when I, a female, was around 5 years old, my sister, 8 and female at the time, and I awoke to hear, through our open bedroom window, my parents yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and they did fight, and it was not typically anywhere that there was a chance of us hearing, though, but this sort of thing did happen from time to time, and although the situation was mildly unusual, we just kind of shrugged it off, shut the window, and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about the ordeal, and it wasn't until years later that we learned the truth about the yelling. So, as a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I am a little fuzzy on the details, as this still occurred long ago, but this was the gist of it. So apparently, at some point that night, after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electric interpreter, the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. I'm unsure how this technology works exactly, so please excuse my lack of knowledge on this topic. Understandably, my parents were a little bit surprised because, well, we didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us, but either way, they accepted the call. I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and kind of alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our house looked like and told my parents that they were hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was a large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees that made it hard to clearly see. There were obviously too many places to look, and at this point, the tormentor made it clear that they had intentions of entering our home and dismembering my sister and I. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There was a chance that nobody was out there, and this was just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they were really where they said they were, and what were my parents doing at that very moment, what were they wearing, and just stuff like that. And this infection of a human on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing, which was waving his middle finger in the air, and exactly what they were wearing. Certain things on her patio were placed, and the expression on my mum's face, and every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night ready to kill any person that he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time, so my mum took the phone, which had finally been put down by my dad, and just called the cops. And as brave, or potentially as stupid, depending how you see it, as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. The police were not able to trace the call either because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever really came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual murderer in our backyard? I guess we will never know. So, this is something that I've kept to myself for 2 years now, and every time I think about it, the hair just all over my body still stands up. Here's some context though. So, my girlfriend and I really like to try and find new hikes in western Colorado. We decided to try a new trail that was not on the national monument, and was a ways away from any other trail. It was a good deal of the way out of the town as well, and anyways, we were one of the only cars parked at the trailhead, and as we were walking, it quickly got dark. We made it all the way until the moon rose, and I stopped to hug my girlfriend and have a romantic moment, when all of a sudden, further down the trail, at least a few miles, we hear automatic gunfire. And then silence for a couple of seconds, and again, more shots. Now, this is kind of a normal thing for my area. Even though it was not public land, I knew a lot of buddies who would know of many forgotten trails to shoot on hand and not get caught. My girlfriend asked me if I thought that they were gunshots, and I told her that I couldn't think of anything else in the middle of the wilderness that would make that sound. But we decided that it would be best to just turn back. I mean, we were about 2 miles down the trail at this point, at the top of a very large hill covered in desert shrubs. But as soon as we stopped talking, we realized something was just very wrong. All of the insects had just stopped chirping. And I mean, there had been dozens of crickets the entire hike up, when all of a sudden, just all the sounds of nature completely stopped. My girlfriend was facing further down the trail, and I was facing back the way that we came, ready to turn back, and she looks behind me and then screams and just starts to run. I was already scared, but I figured the worst it could have been was some drunk redneck about to give us some trouble or something. I turned and looked where she looked, and I immediately ran after her. And I have never run so fast in my life. The shrubs were about 2 to 3 feet high in varying spots, and when I turned around, I just don't know how to describe it, but it looked like a shadow, even with the moonlight directly shining on it. And even with the moonlight directly shining on it, it was almost an absence of light. It was already slowly standing up when I turned around, and as soon as it fully rose up, I realized what I was looking up at, and it had at least a foot taller than me on it. It had a very skinny and bony kind of figure, but it was definitely not human. We sprinted back to my car, still with nature silent the whole way, and I was in such a hurry when we ran to my car that neither of us noticed that I didn't have to take my keys out to unlock the car. We were actually halfway through the drive home when we realized that too, and every single hair on my body was raised, and if I'm being honest, I've never felt anything like what I did when I saw it. Every fiber of my being just screamed run, and I was almost paralyzed by fear that just washed over me. I'm wondering too if anyone else has any idea of what it could have been. I've never seen a ghost, still haven't, but this is probably the closest I think that I've ever been to a true paranormal experience. This occurred in Tennessee in summer of 2006. My wife was working nights at a hospital, and we were living in a remodeled house on a small farm. We didn't do any farming at all, minus some peach trees in the backyard, but had a small pond and leased the acreage for cattle. It's not really that important, but I'm just trying to convey that this is an actual event and not something made up. So, I was sitting in our office on the computer one night, uploading resumes and probably looking at naughty websites. I honestly don't recall, but it was a very typical night by most standards. Around midnight, best I can remember, I got this distinct feeling that someone had walked into the room. And then I felt a warm hand gently rest itself on the back of my neck. It didn't even register initially that it was out of place until I remembered that my wife was at work 35 miles away and I would have seen her walk in. We lived alone too, no kids either. I kind of froze, halfway expecting that I was about to be robbed. I slowly turned my chair around to an empty room. And at this point, my hair was just standing on end. And then my guitar, which was in its case, strummed itself twice, loudly. I never really understood the term frozen with fear until that very moment. And I did the only sensible thing that I could think of. I ran into my backyard and spent a surprisingly restful night in a hammock. Years later, when I tell that story to friends who knew me then, several of them have independently relayed to me that they always had an uneasy feeling while in that house, but didn't want to scare us. We lived there for 4 years and nothing else ever really happened. Except a picture falling off a wall one night around 2 a.m, but the wire had broken on it, so that doesn't really count. And that's my story. It's 100% true, and I can assure you, completely unembellished. Okay, so this happened last night. My friends and I were all hanging out, and it had already been a hectic afternoon. It was a relatively warm evening, so we were going for a walk around the town the majority of us lived in, which is something we do often enough that we would have felt safe doing it individually, let alone the group of 7 people that we were in now. There were 2 15-year-olds and 4 16-year-olds, one of which is a month away from 17. And so, we'd been walking for over an hour now. We always walk to an ice cream shop, which is the furthest point from the house that we meet at, before we turn around and head back. We were already halfway home from there at this 4-way intersection by Dunkin' Donuts, and we're approaching the intersection laughing about something stupid, when this lady across the street just starts screaming. She was borderline old, late 40s or mid-50s or something, and the crazy lady says, "Wait, wait, stop, wait." She runs across the intersection through traffic to get to us, and at this point, all instincts were telling us to turn around. The problem was that, to get home, we had to go in the directions that this person was running from. We approach the intersection just as she reaches us, and the lady says, "Oh good, you're all teenagers. Will you come to our concert later? We have 4 bands. It's teenager music. We've got free pizza and snacks like brownies and cookies. We've even got a popcorn machine." Needless to say, we were a little bit disconcerted. We tried politely to decline, saying that it was getting dark and we were on our way home. However, she would just not let us get a word in edgewise. My friend tried to tell this lady that she didn't like that type of music, but she quickly changed her original statement. She said, "It's all kind of music. Come on, you'll love it. If you don't like it, you can walk right back out. It's just a mile up the street, right over there. Come on, you'll fit right in." And then she forces us in the direction of the concert, trying to get us to follow her. And as if there hadn't already been multiple red flags, this was the first of the more significant ones. All of us were extremely uncomfortable now, but trying to just kind of laugh it off. My cousin was pretty smart though. She held her phone up to her ear as if she was calling someone, although she wasn't. There's terrible cell service in my town, which is something that made everyone even more nervous. But my cousin says, "Hello? Yeah, we're on our way back. We'll be there in a few minutes." And aside to the crazy lady, and then, "Sorry, my dad is calling." And now, crazy lady took practically no notice to this. She just kept trying to convince us, and the sun was almost completely set at this point. We were all itching to just get out of there and go home, so my friend said, "We have to go and ask our parents first." And this is when the most scary and unsettling part of the whole conversation took place. The crazy lady then says, "No, don't tell your parents. It's only half a mile up the road. You have the cell phones, don't you? You can call them on the way there." Now, we're all more than a little nervous at this point, obviously. Everyone is looking at Dunkin' Donuts as though, if we looked hard enough, we'd teleport. Nobody really says anything at this point, and we just don't know what to say anymore. The crazy lady then says, "Don't worry, it's in a church. Nothing bad can happen to you." Cue nervous laughter and muffled disagreements. The crazy lady says, "It's on until 9. We'll be there in half an hour." She gestures across the street to this other lady and two kids in matching yellow t-shirts. They come running across immediately, and as we get closer, it's obvious the kids are extremely uncomfortable and would rather be anywhere else in the world. The other lady is definitely older, as she has white hair, and the crazy lady then says, "These guys are coming to our concert. They don't know anybody, but..." And the older lady interjects as the kids hand out a few flyers and says, "They don't know anybody? Perfect." And at this point, we were all done with this conversation. We have no intentions of being kidnapped 10 minutes from our destination, so we start walking across the crosswalk to Dunkin' Donuts. They want assurance that we'll go later, and we give it to them, falsely of course. We all went into Dunks because there were more people in there, and we felt safer since there hadn't been anyone on the street. All I can say is that the whole thing just felt like an orchestrated attempt at kidnapping. My apologies if this is a little bit long, but I've just never shared my stories with many people, and I actually think that this will be a great way to share it with people that may be able to relate. So, my partner and I moved into our first apartment together in Pasadena, CA, but the unit was in this old home that was in a beautiful historic part of Pasadena. Our unit was on the 3rd level of the house, essentially being the huge converted attic. The apartment was beautiful and had lots of space. It did have a sort of odd energy from the very beginning, but my partner did not believe in anything supernatural or paranormal, so he would always joke around when I made comments about a space feeling heavy or intense. But after a few weeks, things started to happen in our apartment. It all started with the doors. They would move back and forth or just slam shut. I would make comments to my partner, but he said it was probably just the wind, as we had 2 balconies with lots of air circulation. But I also noticed that our cats were just never inside. I have 2 cats, and they're more like dogs, to be honest. They're always around me and cuddle up and everything, and they usually go outside for 1 to 3 hours a day. In this apartment, they would be gone all day, though. And sometimes they just wouldn't even come back at night. I was trying to be chill about everything because nothing dramatic had occurred yet. But one day, I had just left the apartment and my partner was inside alone, and he called me and was really scared over the phone. He told me that he saw a man wearing all black walk through the apartment and into our bedroom. He ran into the bedroom and said that he saw the man walk onto the balcony and just fade away. He was begging me to come home at this point, and when I got back, he was trying to rationalize something that wasn't just possible to him. I told him some stories of my past and some encounters that I had with the paranormal, and he calmed down and we eventually went to sleep. But this was just the beginning of absolute hell. So I started hearing something walk and run up and down the stairs. It would always happen throughout the night and started every night at around 2 a.m. I started to lose so much sleep because I would constantly open our bedroom door to check and nothing was there. My partner was a deep sleeper, so he didn't hear anything. Now, I don't think I've ever seen an apparition, but I could sense someone standing right next to me as I slept, I swear. And I know that this may sound weird, but it would talk to me in my sleep. It would tell me to kill myself and other really awful things. I would often wake up and hear whispers like right in my ear, and the rate of the speech was just so rapid and intense that it would always scare me. My boyfriend was starting to act very detached as well, and he also started drinking daily. We used to have wine night once a week and go out with friends occasionally, but we didn't drink much. I would see him taking shots and hiding vodka and soda and just everything. I didn't question him though because, well, I thought that he was just stressed, but one morning we woke up and I noticed he had scratches just all over his back and on his legs. I freaked out and told him to look in the mirror, and he was really scared and said that he didn't know where they were from. The scratches continued for weeks, and bite marks started to form as well, and my boyfriend also saw the man in black again one night. And after that, he was no longer a skeptic. He fully believed that something was in our home. I, being stupid though, started talking to this energy when I was alone. I would ask it to just please leave us alone, and I would sage our home too. Everything just got much worse after that as well, and at night our living room TV would just randomly turn on, and the volume would always be at the max. But we would both jump out of bed panicked and turn the TV off, but one day I was watching TV with my cat next to me, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I thought it was my partner at first, but the steps continued towards me, and I couldn't see anyone, and I started to get a little bit scared. When suddenly, my cat was thrown across the room. My cat screeched and ran off, and I felt cornered and was really scared. I wear black crystals, and I remember at the time just holding on to it for protection. Through all this pain, though, I reached out to a local psychic medium that had experience with home cleansers. I met him in person, and he told me something was with me. I was like, please don't scare me, I just can't handle any more of this weird stuff, and he said, no, there is something with you that isn't human. He told me that he would need to go to my home ASAP. He came a few days later, and he said that the entity was there again, and he spoke with me in private. He told me that this entity was attaching itself to my partner, and that he needed to do this bathe cleanse for my partner. I've never told my partner this because he was truly freaked out already. But the medium walked around the apartment and said that there were multiple energies in this home. He said that me talking to them and using sage can sometimes invite others and even worse things into the home. He used some other type of stuff to cleanse the home, and we then made this bath for my partner, and he was to sit in the bath with all the lights out for 30 minutes and not get out. I told him that I would do it another day for myself, as I didn't want to alarm him, and he did the bath and things were actually cool for a few weeks. But eventually, everything just started up again. I remember being at a wedding with a friend and my partner called me on the phone, just hysterical, and he said that some of the dishes in our kitchen just started falling to the ground and that he was really scared. I left the wedding early to be with him, and that night was the night that we decided to break our lease and just get the hell out of there. In 2 weeks, we had a new apartment and paid a lot of money to get out of our lease. The landlord worked with us, and she also provided me with the information of the previous tenants. I told her the honest truth, and she didn't believe me, though. I actually talked to the previous tenants on the phone as well, and they were also a young couple, and the girl shared that she too would often hear the footsteps, see the door slam, and would always feel just on edge. However, it didn't escalate for them, and they lived there for about 16 months, and it was so comforting to actually receive some validation that I just kind of sighed in relief. A crazy side note too is the first day in our new apartment, a pipe busted and it was shooting water just on everything. It happened at 3 a.m. and we were really scared that something followed us. After the pipe though, nothing ever happened again, but we were still haunted by those memories, and my partner never questions my intuition now, and he even asks me, how do you feel in this space? Which is kind of funny, to be honest. He's actually like a real believer now, in fact. Now, so many other things happen in that place, like my boyfriend seeing a kid in the bathroom, flickering lights, intense cold spots, and the constant feeling that something is just standing right next to you. And I'm honestly happy to just finally share this story. I have told a few friends, and all but one do not believe me. One even laughed while I was telling her, and I just stopped telling the story to people because, well, I felt like I was inviting negative energy back, and people just never believed me. So, if you've listened this long, thank you for actually hearing me out. Oh, and as for the kid, this is honestly the scariest thing that he ever experienced. I didn't give it as much attention as I probably should have, but the bathroom was just a creepy place in the house. But when you would go in there, the lights would just randomly flicker, and I always let that go because the lights can easily be explained, right? And it may have just been an electrical thing, who knows? But the door to the bathroom was right at the top of the staircase landing, and when you walk into the bathroom there's this huge mirror. This means that when you look in the mirror, you can see the stairs behind you. Now, I always close the door because, well, I'm a chicken, but my boyfriend would often leave it open to just brush his teeth or do his hair and whatnot. Now one day, we were getting ready to go out at night and I heard my boyfriend yelling my name. I went to him and he said, "Oh my gosh, I just saw this kid smiling at me in the mirror." I was like, "I believe you, but it's gone now. Are you okay?" And he said, "Let me show you." And he walked down the staircase, and the stairs had this kind of bend in it where you would turn, and he said the kid was leaning over the curve and just smiling at me. He was shaking and really scared, and he was like, "I don't want to see them anymore," and we ended up leaving to see friends after that. That was the first night too that I told my friend Jennifer about it. It helped us a lot to talk to a friend, and she's my only friend that actually believes us. Jennifer's always been awesome, and it's always made my partner feel more supported to have her. And these days, I'm legit not allowed to bring up the kid story to him, and I sometimes wonder if he saw more and just never told me. This was around the time that I was 11 years old. My dad had just bought a log cabin in the woods of Maine, and the place was just completely dead. And while we had neighbours, we just rarely saw them. We had already spent a few nights up there in previous trips, about a 250-mile trip just to get there, and we decided to take another trip up there for a long weekend. As this cabin was old, my parents decided to get work done on it to make sure that it would be more appealing, so they hired people to come and redo stuff in the rooms, and at the time there was only one bedroom available for us to sleep in. As night fell, we all got ready to go to sleep. There were 6 of us in one room: Mum, Dad, me, 2 brothers and sister. And in the middle of the night, I wake up to audibly clear boot steps in the living room. The bedroom was connected to the living room. All that was between us and the living room was an old wood door and rusty deadbolt lock that would definitely come off if somebody were to kick the door. As I was waking up, I was in a foggy state, as most people are. And then I heard the voice of my sister saying, "Do you hear that?" So now I know this isn't part of my dream and that this was real. I sit up quickly and look to the other bed, and both my parents and my sister are looking at the door and looking at each other. My heart starts to race, not knowing what to think, and I then hear my sister say, "We're going to die," which really doesn't help the situation at hand. As my other brother starts waking up, the boot steps stop for a moment, then continue. Mind you, there was no fading of the steps, which means that the sound came from a general area. We continue to just look at each other in fear and worry, none of us knowing how or why somebody got into our cabin. As my last brother begins to wake up, the boot steps just stop. My dad then gets out of bed and grabs the machete he placed under the bed and heads towards the door, placing his ear on the door slowly to try and see if he can hear anything else. In one quick motion, he unlocks and opens the door while yielding his weapon, prepared for anybody. He walks out into the living room, then to the other rooms to check if everything was clear, and it was. And as a matter of fact, all the doors and the windows were still locked, and there was no possible entry into the cabin, seeing as nothing was tampered with. It was hard to get back to sleep that night, but as I woke up that morning, I remember what happened that previous night, remembering those clear boot steps, and I even confirmed with my family that it wasn't a dream and that we all experienced the same thing. As there was no possible way a person could have entered the house, I came to the conclusion that it must have been something paranormal. Me and my family have tried to debunk this, but can't come up with a solid solution, so if you think you have a reasonable cause for this incident, please let me know. And no, I know for a fact that the boot steps came from inside the house. And this was definitely one of my scariest experiences in my life. I was always a little bit scared in my house growing up. Recently, my sister and I were talking, and it turns out that I wasn't alone either. We both experienced just strange happenings, but never said anything to each other. We had no real reason to think that there was a ghost, and there had been no deaths in the home, and we were only the second family to live in it, but still, things were weird. When we were home by ourselves, we would hear cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen, and one day she was taking a bath and heard a scratch on the door. When our younger sister was around 2, she would have dreams of people that were dead. It started as happy sightings, being visited by her great-grandmother who is no longer alive, and it seemed like a miracle because she was seeing angels. But as she got older, it turned to nightmares and a severe fear of sleeping in the room. So bad, in fact, that she slept with our mum and stepdad for 8 years. Her bedroom always creeped us out too, and no one has slept in it for close to 15 years now. My sister and I shared a room, and on several separate occasions, we saw a dark figure run across the room. I actually remember laying in bed and feeling it sink in like someone sat down to the point that I rolled. I also saw a little girl that would vanish as soon as I started trying to figure out what I was seeing. But the attic was the absolute worst part of the house, bar none, and you had to walk by the stairs to get out to our mum's attached beauty salon. I felt so much dread walking by those stairs and never ever looked up them because I just knew if I did that there would be something terrible there. And my sister, she felt the exact same way. But my sister also told me about her nightmares that she had in the house, but she doesn't have them any longer. She said, so I would have very vivid dreams with my sleep paralysis. Sometimes I would see myself in the middle of our room with all the lights off, and I was possessed by a demon, and I talked in a weird voice. Then I would feel tingling in all of my body and through my head, and as this was happening, the first thought was that I was being attacked by a demon. I would instantly start to pray, and the tingling would just get worse. I would ask God to banish whatever it is attacking me, and all at once I would feel the tingling go through my body, out my head, and it was gone. And I would feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I would have dreams like that multiple times, and I would always pray, and it always went away the same, always tingling. We also watched as our mother got sicker and sicker, drug abuse, and more abusive. When we first moved in, she was a good mum and everything was fine. Her and our stepdad fought occasionally, but nothing too crazy. But the longer we lived in that house, though, the worse it got. And now it's just completely out of hand. I think it's also important to mention that all of our animals have died very young and always suddenly there too. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I do think that there's something fishy going on with this house. I wanted to share this to try and get some advice because I'm personally not allowed to go in the house anymore, but my sister can, and I don't know, maybe she can do something. This story happened 7 years ago, but it feels like it was just yesterday. But July 20th of 2012 was when it happened. It started out as a pretty normal day, if I'm being honest. I was a patient tech at a dialysis clinic in rural Alabama and up way early to open the clinic. First thing I saw after shutting off my alarm at 2:45 a.m. was a text message from my cousin Taylor, who lives in CO but not Aurora, saying, "You're going to see the news about a shooting in CO, but Meg and I are safe." Naturally, I flip on the TV, soaking up the horror while throwing on my scrubs and getting angry at mankind. Great start to a Friday, right? Well, I pull up to my clinic and notice that the nurse that opens with me isn't there yet. No biggie though, because I'm a little early, so I grab my bag and I head in to get started. I finish up my prep work in the water room. You have to do all sorts of testing on the water used in dialysis patients, and I go out on the treatment floor and no nurse still. The clinical manager walks in about that time and says, "Where's the nurse?" To which I replied, "I have no idea. I'll call her." After trying her house and cell without getting an answer, I'm getting a little peeved. This particular nurse was picking up night shifts at the nursing home and just had a bad habit of oversleeping. My CM says, "Why don't you drive by her place," which was one street over from the clinic, "and check to see if she's even there." Now, before anyone says, "Why didn't she go?" let me explain something. It was almost time for the patients to come in, but a nurse has to be in the building in order to even let them in the lobby. My CM was a nurse and could at least let everyone in while we figured out what nurse's deal was. Anyway, I agree to ride because it's literally a stone's throw away, and because I saw her car was there and I was going to lay on the horn until she just got up. I pull up to her house and she's there, so I deploy my "I'm honking mad" tactic until she pokes her head out of the door apologizing and swearing that she'll be at the clinic in 5 minutes. Cool. So I head back to the clinic, park in the still empty parking lot, and start to get out of my car. In the time that it took me to open my door and stand up and turn around, there's this guy right inside my door blocking my way, going, "Where's your bag?" And I'm honestly so confused. I thought he was a patient's spouse or son or friend initially, and I say, "It's inside. Why?" I started to move forward and quickly realized, though, that there's a knife poking me in the chest. We never worry about thieves or druggies because, well, our clinic has no narcotics and nothing to steal unless you're into 10-inch TVs that might or might not have gotten puked or bled on or something. I know only a second or two went by, but it felt like eons, and I remember my ears started ringing and my dad's voice saying, if you get cornered by someone, scream obscenities to shock them. I don't know, he was probably just being sarcastic. But then hit him as hard as you can, and then run. My chest just felt like it was on fire. I mean, why me? And why today? Why'd that guy shoot up a theater, and what's wrong with people? Next thing I know, I'm screaming obscenities, and I slammed my right hand under his knife while swinging a wild uppercut with my left wrist. And I hit him right in the kisser, and he drops the knife and immediately starts backpedaling. I'm yelling after him and he's grabbing his face while breaking into a run, and I watch him dash out the back of the lot and it hits me. The adrenaline rush was over now and I'm beating on the clinic door because my hands are shaking too bad to get my key in the lock. CM lets me in, and right before the door shuts, I see the nurse pull up, and I'm kind of yelling what happened. Ears are still ringing and CM is freaking out and calling 911. Then I look at my hands. My right palm is cut and the 3 knuckles on my left are split. The nurse is inside now and I'm trying not to throttle her, and I know it wasn't exactly her fault, but I'm just going to blame it on the nerves. Cops show up, get the rundown, and insist on taking me to the ER because A, I might need stitches, and B, I'm not hysterical, so they think I'm in shock. I didn't need stitches, I just got some sort of medical superglue, but I had to get a tetanus shot because, to quote the doc, the human mouth is a cesspit of bacteria and filth. Awesome. Very uplifting, right? Now, for some actual uplifting information though, I had given a pretty decent description of the dude, and because I'd landed a decent blow to the face, the officers thought that it wouldn't be hard to find him. And guess what? They didn't have to look. An officer was sitting in the parking lot of the clinic when he sees a guy matching the description walking through looking under cars. The cop is not in an unmarked squad car and thinks, surely no one is that dumb. But, lo and behold, when he gets closer, the guy has a busted upper lip. And apparently, this guy was trying to find the knife that he dropped and maybe a Darwin Award or something. Officer Friendly brings him in for questioning, and it turns out this upstanding fellow has been in and out of prison quite a bit. He admits to everything, well, except that a 5'4", 150-pound lady got the drop on him, and pleads guilty. He was actually given a heavy sentence because of his lengthy criminal history, and, you know, the poorly attempted armed robbery and all. I don't remember when he'll be getting out, but I really hope that I never see that guy again.